Now it was my turn to live in luxury. That's how Jennifer said it on the phone, with such an icy tone and a sharpness like a knife on skin, and the moment her voice penetrated my ears, turning into poison from words full of stinging sarcasm, my insides sank as if suddenly the whole weight of the world sank into my stomach. I felt how the blood froze halfway through my veins, how the internal cold was replaced by a piercing heat, and without thinking, I immediately reached for my mobile. My fingers trembled slightly while I opened the banking app. My heart pounded harder and harder, as if wanting to warn me of something terrible, and what I saw on the screen was not just an alarm signal, it was thunder, splitting the sky of my trust and peace. I had just been discharged from the hospital, where I had spent 3 endless weeks lying in a dark room with the curtains drawn, trying to recover from a terrible car accident that had left me barely alive. My body was still weak, every muscle was aching, and even a short walk to the bathroom seemed like a challenge. I still couldn't believe that I had survived, but the moment my eyes fell on my credit card statement, all memories of pain and helplessness faded into the background, because the account showed that I had spent more than $90,000, almost $100, on designer clothes, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Cartier, as if someone had arranged a royal shopping spree while I lay between life and death, chained to IVs. My name is Roxy Berry, I am 35 years old, and I am one of those women who, from a young age, paved the way for themselves, without anyone's handouts, without lucky tickets. I built my life from scratch, brick by brick, working at night, studying on weekends, raising children and believing in work as the basis of everything. So when I heard the cold, almost triumphant voice of Jennifer, my sister-in-law, on the phone, I immediately understood it was her. She was the only one who nourished envy in me. She often allowed herself caustic comments, sometimes about my wardrobe, sometimes about my living room with Kevin, sometimes about how I was ostentatiously successful, but, frankly, I could not imagine that she could stoop to real meanness. I found her credit card in your purse when I was visiting you, she said, not hiding her pride, and I suddenly realized that in front of me was a person who had lost her boundaries. She didn't even try to make an excuse, didn't apologize. She sounded like a winner, like someone who had finally gotten revenge. You always have everything, you and Kevin never had to fight like I did, so I figured it was only fair. You're always showing off. That's my way of leveling the playing field. I gripped the edge of the sheet, trying to breathe slowly and evenly, even though everything inside me was seething. But I knew that if I wanted to figure this out, I had to be calm. Jennifer, I began, trying to keep my voice from shaking or anger. You do realize that this isn't just a mistake? It's a crime. Credit card theft is a criminal offense. She just laughed, hoarsely, mockingly, as if I'd said something incredibly funny. Oh, please, she waved me off. We're family, and besides, you were unconscious at the time. I was helping Kevin, taking care of the kids. That's my payment for my services. My husband, Kevin, had really struggled to keep everything on his shoulders while I was in the hospital. Work, the kids, the daily trips to see me, the support. I knew how hard it was for him, and, yes, I knew he trusted his sister, letting her help with the kids since we had no one else around. But now that trust was a ticking time bomb. You know, Jennifer? I said quietly, clearly, as if tasting each word. Thank you for telling me all this. It means so much to hear it from you directly. She paused, as if she sensed something. What do you mean? She asked, a hint of alarm. Oh, nothing, I answered easily. It's just nice to have things explained so clearly. And then there was silence again, so much so that you could hear the clock ticking on the wall of the room. Then, almost angrily, she said, you're not going to prove anything. Kevin always trusts me more than you. He knows how dramatic you can be. I didn't answer. I just tapped the screen and ended the call. Then I pressed the button to call a nurse. A few minutes later, Linda, my caring and attentive nurse, an older woman with warm eyes and a voice like tea with honey, quietly walked through the door. Are you okay, Roxy? She asked, noticing my face. I sat up on the pillow, trying to keep my back straight. Linda, you once said that they recently installed new cameras in each room, ones that record both video and audio. Is that true? She nodded. Yes, they installed them last month. Is there anything you want security to check? I smiled for the first time in 3 weeks, weakly, but from the heart. Yes, please, and if you can, call Officer Jacob. It's time to tell the truth. Jennifer had stolen from me, and now I had proof, her confession, recorded on the cameras, and I was not going to keep quiet any longer. I need to report a theft, I said, and with those words, a completely different day began. The next few hours were intense, like someone had suddenly sped up everything that had been moving in slow motion. Officer Jacob, who I had dealt with before on neighbor noise issues, arrived quickly, as if he had been expecting this call. He sat down next to my bed, opened his notebook, and I began to tell him, step by step, in detail, about the call from Jennifer, about what she had said, about my credit card statement, about me lying unconscious while she cleaned out my account. After I finished telling Officer Jacob the whole story, from that very call from Jennifer to the bank statement with the monstrous charges, he nodded silently, opened his clipboard, and, pursing his lips, said that now it was necessary to take one important step, to check the recordings from the security cameras installed in my room. He left the room for only a few minutes, and all that time I felt my heart pounding in my chest like an alarm, warning that the moment of truth was approaching. The moment when the masks would fall and everything would become clear as glass. When he returned, there was no longer any doubt in his eyes. He carefully turned the tablet towards me, touched the screen with his finger, and the video slowly started. On the screen, I saw how the door of the ward opened a crack, and Jennifer entered the room, looking around ingratiatingly. She looked confident, even relaxed, as if she had come not to a hospital room to see an unconscious woman, but for a manicure. She went to the bedside table, sat down, took my purse and, glancing briefly towards the bed, opened it. The recording clearly showed how she took out my wallet, took out a credit card, pointed the phone camera at it and took a photo. Then, with the same ease and familiarity, she puts everything back, as if she's done it before, and smiles a calm, almost condescending smile. A little later in the video, an even more shocking moment, she's sitting at my bedside, laughing, leaning towards me and taking a selfie, as if this were a visit and not a crime. Officer Jacob flipped through his notes, and not a shadow of doubt remained on his face. He looked at me with a serious, even slightly sympathetic expression. Mrs. Barry, he said evenly, we have before us a clear case of fraudulent use of your credit card. Do you wish to press charges? Before I could answer, the door to the room swung open and Kevin appeared on the threshold, pale, agitated, out of breath, as if he had just run down the hallway to get here as quickly as possible. Liv, what's going on? He asked, alarm in his voice. I just got a call from Jennifer. She was crying, saying that you were slandering her, that it was all a lie. I didn't explain, didn't argue, didn't make excuses. I simply gestured toward the clipboard in the officer's hands. Look, I said quietly, and Kevin came closer, leaned down, looked at the screen, and began to watch. At first his face was confused, as if he were trying to figure out what exactly he was seeing. But as Jennifer took pictures of my chart and laughed at my bedside, recognition came into his eyes, then disappointment, and then something deeper, heavier, more painful. He froze, his eyes fixed on the screen, and then whispered, she said she came to pray for you. He sat heavily in the chair next to my bed. She said she just wanted to help. His voice was quiet, barely audible, as if he were ashamed even to say it. She bought herself $90,000 worth of designer clothes, Officer Jacob added, and Kevin sighed as if the words were weighing on his chest. He was silent for perhaps a full minute before he finally looked at me. His eyes were full of pain, disappointment, and at the same time, there was a hardness in them. He slowly took my hand, squeezed it, and said, do it. Jennifer needs to understand that family has no right to betray, especially like this. The officer nodded, collected his tablet, and left the room. Not even 10 minutes had passed when my phone rang again. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen. Kevin caught my eye, picked up the phone, and turned it on speakerphone. Kevin. Thank God it's you. Jennifer's voice was high, trembling, full of tears. Roxy is lying, she's trying to ruin my life. You know how she can be. She made it all up. Kevin didn't answer right away. He waited, let her talk, gave her a chance, and then, quietly, with a heavy voice, he said, you were filmed. The cameras recorded everything, Jennifer, everything, both sound and video. There was a ringing, icy silence on the other end of the line, as if time had stopped, and then, a hurried, breaking voice, I can explain everything. I wanted to return the money, I just needed to save it for the police. Kevin interrupted, they're on their way to your house. He pressed the button and ended the call. I leaned back against the pillows, feeling the fatigue slowly spread through my body, as if I had only just now allowed myself to relax. but with that fatigue came relief, warm, calm, real, something I hadn't felt since the moment I woke up in the hospital room. The truth was out. Jennifer had taken advantage of my powerlessness, my vulnerable days, to steal from me, confident that I would never know. She thought she could get away with it. Instead, she had trapped herself by revealing her true nature to everyone. Kevin was still holding my hand, his fingers were warm, safe, and there was no longer any doubt in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly, "I shouldn't have trusted her so much." "It's not your fault," I said. "None of this is your fault. The truth is on our side now, and we need to move on. Peace comes when justice is restored to balance." I said it almost in a whisper, closing my eyes, and silently, "She will understand. She will understand very soon that stealing from family does not go unpunished. What goes around comes around." The next few days at the hospital were hectic. Despite all the events, I continued my recovery, step by step, day by day, with the help of Nurse Linda, who patiently helped me get up, take my first, still hesitant steps, and the doctors reservedly praised my successes, not forgetting to remind me that the path to full recovery was still long. But even though I felt my strength returning to my body every day, how the heaviness in my legs was slowly but surely leaving and my mind was clearing up. I understood that the process of my recovery was far from complete, because there was still an unresolved burden on my soul, the one that bore the name Jennifer. And just when I was already starting to think that everything could drag on for weeks, Officer Jacob entered the ward again, and I immediately understood from his face there was news, and it was important. He stopped at the edge of the bed, looked at me with a slight nod and said, "We have arrested Jennifer. It happened this morning." In her apartment. I held my breath. He continued, looking me straight in the eye, not hiding his seriousness. "She was completely confused when we arrived. The apartment was a mess, bags, boxes, designer bags, and shoes everywhere. Some of them still had price tags on them. She denied everything, said there was a mistake, but we have everything we need: the video from the camera, the recordings of her conversations, the shopping list, and most importantly, her own confession when she spoke to you on the phone." While the officer was busy with paperwork and proving her guilt, I tried to focus on recovery, but my heart was still restless. My phone was ringing endlessly, and each new message brought with it another wave of anxiety. Jennifer, under pressure, took a different path. She began to spread lies. She called mutual friends, she called relatives, and each time she told them the same story, that I had given her permission to use my credit card, that I had let her make purchases, and now I was trying to make her look bad because, as she put it, I couldn't handle her youth and energy. She twisted the facts, twisted the words, manipulated trust. One message, delivered by voice rather than text, literally made my heart clench with pain and anger. I turned on the recording, and heard the sharp, accusing voice of my mother-in-law. "Patricia, you were always jealous of Jennifer, always," she told me. "Everything. How dare you try to ruin her life?" My fingers clenched into fists, my voice caught in my throat. I couldn't believe that Patricia, who was almost like a second mother to me, could think that I was capable of such a thing. Kevin, who was sitting in a chair by the window, noticed my condition, came over, carefully took the phone from me and, looking at the screen, quietly said, "She doesn't know the whole truth. Jennifer lied to her too." I nodded, narrowing my eyes. "Then it's time to show her the truth," we agreed with Officer Jacob. And that same evening Patricia came to the hospital room. Her face was hard, her gaze was intense, like a person who had come to protect her beloved child from injustice. She stood by the door, her arms crossed, her lips pursed, but as soon as the officer turned on the camera recording, everything changed. She watched her daughter enter my room, look around, pull my wallet out of my purse, take a picture of my credit card, smile, and then calmly sit down next to my unconscious form and take a selfie. She didn't say a word, just stood there, white, her face drained of color. Then she sank into a chair, as if her legs could no longer support her, and whispered, "I don't understand." She said you gave her permission, that you were trying to make up for always flaunting your luxury. Kevin stood next to her, his voice soft but firm. "Mom, she stole from Roxy, while Roxy was unconscious. There's no excuse for that. She didn't ask, she just took." Patricia didn't answer right away. She held her phone in her hands, as if searching for an explanation, an escape, but instead she was probably remembering everything Jennifer had told her over the past weeks, and now those words sounded completely different in my head. She said they were gifts, that she won one of the bags in a contest, that the outfit was from a friend. She shook her head, her eyes full of confusion. I realized that everything had become clear to her, and in that moment it became clear, it wasn't just about the money, not just about the luxury bags, shoes, watches. It was about the trust that Jennifer had destroyed in an instant, not just mine, but her family's, her mother's, her brother's, and now she would have to answer not to words, not in front of her family, but in front of a court where there was no place for lies. A few days later, I sat on a bench in the courtroom, leaning on the cane the doctors had given me. My body still didn't allow me to walk without support. Kevin took the seat next to me. His gaze was focused, his hand confidently holding mine. I knew I had to be here, had to see it with my own eyes, because justice can't be left to its own devices, it must be followed, step by step, until it becomes reality. The courtroom was filled with tense anticipation as the doors swung open and Jennifer walked in. She walked confidently, in a carefully chosen outfit, blouse, jacket, hair done up. On her face a slight, forced smile, as if everything that was happening was just an awkward misunderstanding, and not a criminal case of theft. She looked around the room as if confidence was still her armor, as if this was nothing more than a misunderstanding that was about to dissipate. One only had to smile harder and demonstrate her posture, like a person who firmly believed that the world still revolved around him. That familiar half-smile, curved on Jennifer's face, lasted until her public defender, slightly raised, read out the formal charges, each word of which resonated in the room with a dull tension. The judge, a solid older man with piercing eyes, said, without taking his eyes off Jennifer, "Miss Aniston, the evidence in your case is compelling. There is clear video of you entering a hospital room, removing your sister-in-law's credit card, and taking photographs of her while she was unconscious. Do you understand the gravity of the charges against you?" Jennifer still seemed to be hoping to get out of this. She lifted her chin, straightened her back, and answered with feigned calm, "Your Honor, this is just a misunderstanding. Roxy and I had an agreement. She allowed me to use her card so that we could work things out. She always flaunted her wealth, and it was a kind of peacemaking gesture." The judge leaned forward slightly, his gaze cold, his voice harsh. "Are you saying she gave you permission while she was in intensive care? When you were unconscious?" he asked. There was a moment of ringing silence, and even Jennifer's stubborn face lost color. She hesitated, then muttered, "Well, I..." Her uncertainty gave the prosecutor the floor. He stood up, stepped forward confidently and said, "Your Honor, we have video that clearly shows the defendant entering Mrs. Barry's room more than once. She can be seen purposefully rummaging through her personal belongings, finding a credit card, photographing it and returning it. We also have an audio recording of a telephone conversation in which Jennifer admits to what she did and even laughs at the state of the victim, and it was at that moment that I first saw in Jennifer something I had not noticed before: real, genuine panic. Her face turned pale, her lips trembled. She began to look for Kevin with her eyes, as if she hoped that he, her brother, would save her, speak out in her defense, find the words that would put everything back in its place. But Kevin did not move. He sat there, staring at one point, his face cold as marble. He did not look at her. For him, too, it was a betrayal, a deep, personal one, and he could no longer look at his sister the same way. The judge took a deep breath, clearly having already made up his mind, and in a controlled but firm voice, he declared, "Because the defendant's actions were planned, premeditated, and carried out with full knowledge of the consequences, I reject the plea bargain. This case will proceed to a full trial." Jennifer's face twisted, and her lawyer quickly stood up, asking for a break so he could talk to her outside the courtroom. They left, but even through the closed door I could hear her sobbing, crying, and the sound, strangely trembling and thin, echoed in my chest. I sat in silence, remembering everything that had happened. She really believed that she could turn everything to her advantage, that she could take everything from me, blaming it on family feuds, envy, my supposed rich woman games. She assumed that, being related, we would cover for her until the end, but the reality, as it turned out, was different. Now she knew that even family ties have their limits, and theft is no less criminal if committed against a family member. When the hearing resumed, her voice was quiet, like the rustling of paper, and there was no longer any defiance in it. Her defense attorney announced that she was ready to plead guilty. The judge nodded, recorded it in the protocol, set a date for sentencing, and the guards immediately gave the signal. she was raised from her seat, handcuffed, and when she walked past us, there was no longer an elegant suit. No neat hairdo, all this was replaced by a simple, faded orange jumpsuit, with a sign with her name on the chest. She lowered her head, and hid her eyes from everyone. As we walked out of the courthouse, slowly descending the steps, Patricia came out to meet us. Her face was puffy from crying, and her eyes were red, like those of someone who had spent a sleepless night racking her soul trying to understand how things could have gone so far. She came up to me, stopped, and her voice was as trembling as her daughter's, only much quieter, deeper, with a note of pain that could no longer be hidden. "Roxy. Kevin," she said, "I'm sorry, I should have known. Jennifer was always jealous of you, Roxy. I thought it was just resentment, stupidity. But I never imagined that she was capable of such a thing." I looked at her and saw before me not the woman who had defended her daughter with blazing eyes just a week ago, but a mother whose heart was broken, and who was only now realizing that perhaps she herself had been a part of that lie, without even knowing it. There was no longer any judgment in her gaze, only sadness and a deep, silent weariness, and I understood. We were all hurt by this story, we all believed Jennifer to be someone else, but now the truth was out, and as bitter as it was, it still gave us hope for healing. I looked down and whispered, "Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting that the person you love is not who you thought they were." A few months passed. I was back in the courtroom, this time to hear the verdict. My body still ached faintly, reminding me of the accident that changed everything, but inside I felt like I had come a long way. I was no longer angry, I just wanted it all to be over. The prosecutor stood up, his posture sharp and collected, his voice level but with a cool determination, a sternness that could not be confused with irritation or emotion. "The voice of the law, Your Honor," he began, addressing the judge so that every word echoed off the walls of the courtroom. "We have overwhelming evidence that the defendant did not act impulsively or foolishly, but according to a preconceived plan." He paused, then picked up a folder of papers. "Her internet search history clearly shows that even before Mrs. Barry was admitted to the hospital, the defendant was researching how security works in medical facilities, was interested in CCTV systems, and, most importantly, was reading articles about how credit card thefts are committed and investigated." I felt my insides clench, which meant that Jennifer hadn't just seen the moment and given in to temptation. She had been preparing, thinking, looking for loopholes. The prosecutor continued, "While Mrs. Barry was fighting for her life after a terrible accident, when every second counted, and doctors did everything they could to save her, the defendant, her sister-in-law, took advantage of this terrible time for personal gain." He paused, looked at Jennifer, and in that pause there was everything: condemnation, bitterness, and the weight of understanding. "And it's worth noting," he added, "that the defendant only expressed regret when she was caught red-handed. We ask the court to impose the full sentence in accordance with the terms of the plea bargain." I looked at Jennifer. She sat at the defense table, no longer looking like the confident, sardonic woman who had once laughed into the phone as she told me she was finally living in luxury. Her fashionable glitz had disappeared, her expensive clothes replaced by a simple black suit that seemed to hang on her emaciated frame, as if she had shrunk in the months. Not just physically but mentally. For the first time, her face showed genuine confusion. It was not pretense, not feigned submission, but fear, quiet, deep, almost childlike. The judge, his expression impassive, turned to her. "Ms. Aniston," he said, dropping his hands to the table, "before I pronounce the verdict, is there anything you'd like to say?" She stood up slowly, her movements were awkward, her hands shaking, one of them holding a folded piece of paper. I looked at her and couldn't believe that standing in front of me was the same Jennifer who once snatched money from me with ease, almost cheerfully, believing that she could get away with it. She took a deep breath, her voice barely audible. "I want to apologize." She looked down. "I was jealous. I was jealous of Roxy for the way she lived. I was angry that she had something I didn't. I convinced myself that it wasn't fair, that she always flaunted her life, her stability, her love. When I saw the credit card in her bag, something inside me clicked. I told myself that she wouldn't notice, that she didn't care, that she owed me for everything I'd been through, but I was wrong." She clenched the paper in her fingers. "I didn't think that I was betraying more than just her. I was betraying my family, myself, everyone." I searched her face, trying to discern if this was a confession or an act of desperation, remorse or manipulation. Kevin's grip on my hand tightened, But he said nothing, his face remained stony. The judge listened attentively, without interrupting. When Jennifer sat down, he nodded, opened the folder, and began to speak in a calm, even voice that nevertheless sounded like a sentence on the air itself. "Miss Aniston," he said, "your actions speak for themselves. They were selfish and cruel. You took advantage of a woman who could not defend herself. Not only did you steal from her, you then lied about it. Tried to smear her name, and turned her family against her. This court cannot ignore the enormity and consequences of your actions." He set the papers aside. "You are sentenced to 19 months in prison and 6 years of probation. You are ordered to repay the entire amount you spent on someone else's card, as well as pay a fine. All items purchased with stolen funds will be confiscated and sold to cover the debt." The courtroom fell silent. The bailiff approached, and as Jennifer stood up, the handcuffs snapped shut again. She turned around, and in that moment, for the first time ever, for the first time, I saw real understanding in her eyes, not fear of the court, not anger at being exposed, but sadness. She realized what she had lost, not just her freedom and money, but something far more valuable: trust, respect, love. All that she had previously taken for granted, all that was now lost, perhaps forever. Patricia was waiting for us at the entrance to the courthouse. She stood a little to the side, wrapped in a light gray scarf, her eyes red from crying, her face haggard. "I've thought a lot," she said, coming closer. "For years I made excuses for her. I told myself that her jealousy was just fatigue, stress, the difficulties of life. I didn't want to see the truth. But now I see it. I should have known, I should have intervened sooner." I looked at her and, for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just sadness. We all wanted to believe in the best. We all hoped that Jennifer would change, that she just needed time, understanding, a chance. But the truth, as it often does, was harsher than any fantasy. I nodded, slowly, with the inner calm that only comes after a long struggle. "We always want to see the light in people, especially the ones we love," I said, "but sometimes the truth is the first step to healing, to a new life, without lies, without fear." Patricia looked down. Kevin standing next to her, his hand still in mine. We had all lost in this story, each in our own way, but now, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe deeply, and that this family, despite everything, still had a chance to find a path to peace. We all wanted to believe that family meant something to her, but now, at least, we knew what family meant to us. Kevin took a deep breath, as if exhaling the last of the pain that had settled in his chest over all this time. And, looking out the window where the soft sunset was beginning to envelop the streets in a gentle light, said with quiet but firm confidence, "The hardest thing is not the betrayal itself, Roxy. It's that she planned it all. It wasn't an impulse, a mistake, or a weakness. She watched, she waited, and she just waited for the right moment to take advantage of us." His voice wavered slightly, and I felt that these words did not come easy to him, because when a stranger betrays, it hurts. But when someone you have known since childhood, to whom you trusted family, children, home, it becomes a wound that is difficult to heal. But still, we learn to live with this truth, day by day. Accepting that what happened was reality, and not a bad dream. Over the next few months, as winter slowly turned to spring and the first warm summer since the accident, things began to change. The police finished collecting the property Jennifer had purchased with the stolen funds. And I was surprised to learn how much she had: designer clothes, shoes, jewelry, bags, all neatly packed in boxes, each labeled, a silent reminder of the greed that had been her downfall. It was all up for auction, but as often happens, luxury items lose their value when the magic of self-delusion wears off. Most of the items sold for pennies compared to what she had paid for them. Her once full, bustling apartment, where she had loved to invite friends over and have her fashion purchases photographed, now stood empty, a symbol of her disillusionment. And then the letters began. Jennifer began writing to me from prison, at first in uneven handwriting, as if each word was an effort. The first few letters were full of excuses. She blamed circumstances, her life, even me, saying I was playing my superior and pushing her away with my success. I read them in silence, without responding. I just couldn't. I wasn't ready to open that wound up again. But then, as the months went by, something in her tone began to change. Slowly at first, the accusations disappeared, then the complaints, and then, about 8 months into her imprisonment, I opened another envelope and felt my heart clench as I read, I didn't just steal your money, Roxy, I stole your trust, I destroyed our family, and the worst thing is, I can't blame you anymore, it was my fault, all mine." I read the letter several times, each time hearing her voice change, quieter, more honest, almost human. Kevin rarely spoke of Jennifer. He, like me, was still on his way to recovery, and I knew he had started seeing a therapist. His silence wasn't indifference, it was protective. He still carried the weight of that betrayal, like a man who had lost part of his family and didn't know if it would ever come back. Patricia had changed, too. She had started attending a support group for parents whose children were incarcerated, and for the first time, she openly admitted to me that she had been turning a blind eye to Jennifer's behavior for years, convincing herself it was adolescence, a difficult period, worth the influence of friends. It was a hard admission, but it was her first real step toward forgiveness, not of Jennifer, but of herself. After years of silence, my body had long since recovered. I no longer needed a cane, I no longer woke up in pain, I was no longer afraid to look in the mirror. But the emotional recovery was slower. Sometimes, when I was alone, a wave of memories washed over me, lying in a hospital room, unable to speak, my credit card being taken from my wallet while I clung to life. But there was strength in that pain, too. The hospital had changed its security policies, in part because of my experience. I was invited to speak to the staff, sharing my story, and knowing that my experience had helped others was empowering. It was more than recovery, it was transformation. A year later, on a quiet September day, just as the leaves were changing color, I got a call. The voice on the other end was polite, calm, a prison counselor. He said Jennifer was in a rehabilitation program, doing well, learning, trying. He added, "She's very interested in meeting with you, under supervision. Would you consider that?" I was silent for a long time, listening to my heart, listening to what I really felt, not what I should have, and then I answered, quietly but firmly, "No, I wish her peace, I hope she finds peace, but I don't need to be a part of her journey. This is her journey, not mine." That evening, I told Kevin about the call. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun slowly dip below the horizon, painting the sky in pastel shades. I said no, I said, "I hope she finds peace, but I don't need to walk this path with her." Kevin looked at me and nodded. "I understand," he said. "Sometimes not being involved is the way to take care of yourself." We both knew that we were different now, not broken, but changed. We learned the hard truth about how fragile trust can be, and how painful it is to realize that not every family is a rock. Jennifer had lost more than just money and things. She had lost her honor, her freedom, her name. She had lost that invisible thread that binds people together when they trust each other without words. No brand, no designer bag is worth that kind of price. Last I heard, she was still taking classes in prison, learning business ethics, telling counselors she wanted to start over, to live honestly, to build something of her own, even if it was from scratch. And maybe she could find her way back to herself. But I realized, some lessons aren't paid for with money, they're paid with people, the ones you lose along the way.